Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another video. Supatease here, and I'm going to be bringing a Battle for Azeroth Balanced Druid PvP guide. I was playing on the beta for Battle for Azeroth, and of course, everything is subject to change, so of course, the things that I'm about to discuss could easily alter. However, we're 2 days away from the game actually coming out, so I'm not sure if it's going to drastically change outside of maybe balance tuning. Numbers and such, so the gameplay isn't going to be very much different from what it is in the beta. I've really been enjoying my time on Moonkin overall. It seems to be a very well-rounded spec with a lot of utility, decent sustain damage, and as well as burst damage. It's got a nice toolkit for a PvP player with high awareness and interest in like team utility and teamwork. You can do a lot with it, and I've been enjoying it so much that I'm actually going to be leveling my druid first. There's also the thing with Mez not letting me raid unless I play a DPS spec apparently, so I'm going to be playing Moonkin instead of Shadow Priest. I just prefer it, although Shadow Priest got a lot of extra utility as well, but that's another topic. In this video, I'm just going to be going over kind of what's changed, what you should expect, what's been removed, what's been added. So some things that were removed are talents such as Displacer Beast, and that's a talent that's been in the game for Balanced Druid since Mists of Pandaria, which is just basically blink on a 30-second cooldown, and that's been replaced with Tiger Dash, which reduces the cooldown of sprint to 45 seconds, and you run so extraordinarily fast with it that it's almost hilarious to look at. It's very good for kiting, so if you're fighting 2 melee DPS, you can pair Typhoon and Tiger Dash together to escape double melee and kite them quite effectively. That's usually what I like to do at the moment, at least against double melee. But against like Wizard Cleaves, like in this video that you're watching with Elemental Shaman and Frost Mage, I find the healing from Renewal, which has remained unchanged, to be more beneficial. You just a quick pick me up whenever your healer is crowd controlled and you're getting bursted, so I preferred it overall. So Displacer Beast is no longer in the game. New Moon, Half Moon, Full Moon are no longer baseline, and that was a bit of a hard point of criticism from my point of view for Balanced Druid, because that spell was so engaging overall outside of the normal rotation instead of just spamming out Solar Wraths, which is typically what you're doing because it's faster and you're more likely to actually get it off before the person line of sights you, stuns you, or interrupts you. Again, faster things are better in PvP, generally speaking, so you sometimes use Lunar Strike when you have empowerments, but outside of that you're generally spamming Solar Wrath. And when you had New Moon, Half Moon, Full Moon, that gave you something else that you could prioritize because it actually hit for a bunch of damage. It's not baseline, but it is a talent. So far, I think its cooldown was nerfed significantly, and it's not doing that much damage. I tried it in a few games later on, and it didn't seem to be worth it overall. Right now, Shooting Stars is kind of the go-to talent, which is similar to older expansions where keeping your dots up meant that you'd get Star Surge procs, right? Instead of getting Star Surge procs, it gives you a bit of astral power, which then builds up into a instant Star Surge. So it kind of brings back some of that element, which I really enjoyed, but it is also pretty gear dependent. You need haste, so your dots are ticking a bit faster. I'm not sure if it will be competitive enough right at the start of the expansion when haste is very low and everyone has low stats. So it may be more likely that Fury of Elune ends up being the best talent, at least at the start of the expansion, which is just a 1-minute cooldown laser beam from the sky that generates astral power and chases people around killing them. It got nerfed and it's not really doing that much damage, but it'll be more damage than the other two options at the start of the expansion with low gear. Another thing that's coming back to the game, which was in the game at the start of Legion and then got removed because it was too strong, which is Twin Moonfire, and that just means you shoot 2 Moonfires out with 1 press instead of 1. That was an honor talent at the start of Legion, and it made Moonkin do crazy damage, like absolutely crazy damage, to the point where the honor talent was deleted and turned into a legendary. It was that crazy that it needed to become a legendary. But then that legendary then got turned into a talent because the ramp up time for Moonkin was so much lower than every other class, and this is what's kind of happening with a lot of classes that have ramp up dots, is that they either passively cleave or they apply an expiry. That way your ramp is lower and you can kind of compete with melee, and it's kind of homogenizing everything, but it also makes you stronger because it takes you less global cooldowns to get Moonfire on everybody, and you also just do 2 Moonfires to 2 people, which is more damage than 1 Moonfire to 1 person. And in particular, Starfall received heavy nerfs throughout Legion, and I feel like there's no way that Starfall can ever be competitive without being broken, simply because it has no cooldown. You put it on the ground. The counterplay is that you see the circle and you can move out of the circle and avoid the damage, but you can take other talents to increase the radius, and it may become a little bit more difficult to actually get out of it. So Starfall has always received heavy nerfs, to the point where it's just, you don't even press it. Like, outside of maybe stopping someone from drinking, because it can go around corners, you're never using Starfall. So any talent that is oriented towards Starfall, you don't look at either, which makes your talent choices much more limited, such as the Twin Moonfire row. So you're basically taking Twin Moonfire because it increases your ramp time, gives you better instant damage, which you really want in PvP, especially if you're being attacked or you're chasing people, because it's difficult to get casted spells off in those situations. And then the other talent is something to do with Starfall, and the other talent is Stellar Flare, which received a lot of quality of life changes, a lot of them that I've almost kind of thought should happen in the past. So it no longer costs astral power, it generates astral power. However, the drawback for it is that it's on every school of magic, and it's a casted dot. So it's like Vampiric Touch for Shadow Priest. Except, if you get interrupted on it, you don't do anything. You can't press any other abilities. You are just stuck. And it doesn't do enough damage to risk getting completely locked out of your character for an extended period of time by being interrupted, as well as losing the ramp-up time from having 2 Moonfires. So it's just not, you can't take that trade normally. So unless it receives balance tuning changes to the point where it's just, whoa, it's crazy damage, we have 3 dots, we need it. In terms of its quality of life usage in PvP, I don't see it being used. I personally don't like having 3 dots either. I feel like we're treading into Affliction Warlock territory when we get there. I kind of like Moonkin as this mediary between Mage and Warlock. It has crowd control and it has some dots, but it's not the best at either. So you can bounce between the two, but you're not excelling at either. And that's kind of where Moonkin has always fit for me in my personal preference, because it has that playstyle choice. Outside of that, generally speaking, I think you're going to be playing Warrior of the Elune most games. That's kind of talent on the first row. It gives you 3 instant lunar strikes, and they generate more astral power to do more damage. It kind of just gives you a kickstart, and again increases your ramp. Because the recent changes to Balance Druid that I went over in a previous video, they made Star-Lord baseline and then made a new Star-Lord. So the baseline Star-Lord means that your Wraths do more damage, your lunar strikes are faster, all this quality of life stuff, which is why I think Moonkin is excelling. It may even be the best ranged DPS outside of Rogue Mage at the moment for Battle for Azeroth, but I do kind of expect it to be nerfed, probably targeting at the dots. When I was running with Details or Recount, it's a damage recording add-on on live servers, and I looked at my damage breakdown. My Moonfire, Sunfire were almost always close to 50% of my damage. So I'm imagining there's going to be some sort of nerf towards Moonfire and Sunfire, but I'm hoping that it's not so much so that our dots become irrelevant. Again, because I like Moonkin in this world where you're in between a Warlock and a Mage. If the dots don't do any damage, then you're just on the Mage side, and you're not as good as the Mage. I would hope that it's not going to be overly nerfed. However, I do kind of expect it to be. And the only reason I don't think that it has been nerfed yet is because Moonkin is parsing quite terribly in PvE. So there may be changes that are going to affect Moonkin overall in the game to help them in PvE. And then they're probably going to get counteracted with PvP specific nerfs. And Moonkin's kind of always the spec that if it's good, everybody complains. It's because it's not a very popular spec. Not very many people play it, but a lot of people play against it. So when it's good, it's like, oh, everybody complained about it. But when something like Mage is good, everyone plays Mage, so not a lot of people complain about it. Generally speaking, people don't complain when their spec is good. But I would acknowledge that Moonkin is probably the best caster at the moment, outside of some Mage compositions like Rogue Mage or even Shadow Priest Mage. In particular, Frost Mage Shadow Priest right now felt really strong when I was fighting against Min Poike's team a couple of days ago. Felt pretty untouchable. So there are definitely other comps and other classes to take into consideration moving into the actual launch. Like Survival Hunter seems to be doing really well, Retribution Paladin doing really well. I think there's going to be a couple of surprise specs that people don't expect to be really good. when the game actually launches. Arms Warrior also is doing a lot of damage right now when I was playing these threes. But let's just stay focused onto Moonkin. So obviously the honor talent system changed, which allows a lot more customization, and Moonkin is a spec that benefits from that a lot because there's a quite diverse range of honor talents to choose from. So if you're being tunneled down by a team and you want more personal defense, you can spec into Iron Feather, Guardian, Magic Damage Reduction in Bear form, Thorns, Disarm, Cyclone. Like, you can spec into this huge array of defense, utility, and crowd control to kind of negate that and buffer that. But then also you have the option to go into damage talents like Moonkin Aura or Crescent Burn for more Moonfire damage. So if you want to take the risk of losing the utility and the crowd control to get a bit more damage, maybe you just need a little bit to eke over the edge and find victory, you have that choice. Or you're just someone who likes to do more damage and not really focus on crowd control, you can be that player. I can remember when I played in Cataclysm, there were Moonkins that really focused on clone and hard casting single target damage. Then there were other Moonkins that never cloned, only dotted and focused on AoE damage, and they were all successful in their own different ways. And that's what really made the game fun, is when you could play in your own unique play style. And with the honor talent changes that have been applied, you're going to have that choice and have that room to move. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's any set of talents that is like, this is the best set of honor talents, you take this in all cases, outside of maybe Cyclone. Cyclone is usually like the go-to, but you can pick between Disarm, so maybe you help your teammate by crowd controlling them, or you can help yourself, but you run the risk because it's dispellable in a long cooldown, whereas you could have got more passive defense from the Bear Form talent, reduces magic damage on yourself. That would just be there the whole game, and you have to weigh the risks. You have to kind of figure out what strategy are they going for, maybe what honor talents are they playing to try and go after the weaknesses that you can find in that decision making. I really enjoy the honor talent changes overall in the expansion. Now, you may be wondering, because gear matters now, if you didn't know that, Legion stats didn't matter, you were templated. It was like you went in as a Super Smash Brothers character, you're playing Fox, everyone is Fox, and you're the same. Outside of item level, maybe you're like a little stronger Fox than somebody else. But now stats matter. So you might be thinking, oh, Haste Mastery, because that's kind of what's been Moonkin's stat priority for a long time. Mastery is actually really bad. I went to Icy Veins, I looked at the parsings and the raid logs. Mastery is actually our worst stat. The only downside is that is for someone like me who likes to bounce between Resto and Moonkin. Resto is Haste Mastery, and you used to be able to bounce between the two quite easily because they were both very similar stat priority, but now Mastery is the worst, so it's like, that's gonna kind of suck for me. But for your own curiosity and know like what kind of gear to go after, Haste is your best stat period. Like, it leaps and bounds infinity better than any other stat. Haste is really, really, really good. That's why I'm even playing the Star-Lord talent instead of Incarnation, is to get more haste for more sustained damage throughout the fight. And between Incarn and Star-Lord, I was doing relatively the same damage. Star-Lord will just do more damage if you're playing better. So Star-Lord has a higher skill cap, like your uptime with it, your astral power generation, when you're timing it, not letting it fall off. So I think Star-Lord will be the skill cap talent to take over Incarn, but Incarn might be better in some burst situations like Rogue Moonkin or something. Mage Moonkin, you might still be taking Incarn, but Star-Lord is probably more sustained damage if you're playing well than Incarnation actually will be, which I'm really pleased to see because I'm not an Incarnation fan. I'd much prefer sustained damage being higher than I pressed Incarn. Now I'm doing unhealable damage and killing everybody at the same time. I'd much rather have the sustained damage where every single global cooldown choice matters, and if you're making a mistake, it accumulates over time, and all these mistakes over time will then eventually lead to you losing outside of this outside of situations that normally happen where it's like, I have this cooldown and you don't, so you die instantly kind of feeling. It's not really my preference, so I much prefer the Star-Lord playstyle. But the stat priority, so haste is really good. And then in terms of PvE, for your highest damage output, crit is then your next best stat, versatility mastery. I'm going to say that there's probably some playstyle differences there in PvP, at least for stat choices there, is that haste is the best. You're going to always go for haste. But then you may want to go for crit for damage, or you may want to go for versatility for defense and healing, because obviously Moonkin is a hybrid. It's mobile, but it's not that mobile. So people hitting you will have an easy time hitting you, generally speaking. So you will be attacked, so versatility will reduce the damage you take, and it still gives you some damage. So I might be going for haste versatility over haste crit, but I kind of expect haste crit to be the default kind of cookie cutter talent build or stat build. But I think haste versatility wouldn't be that bad either. And the nice part about versatility being at least somewhat competitive with crit is that because the stats on the gear that is awarded to you is random, you're guaranteed a piece of gear every week from PvP, but you're not guaranteed the stats that you want. So generally speaking, you're going to have to hunt for gear throughout all different avenues of the game. And I think if you really want to min-max your character, have the haste priority, crit priority after that on every piece of gear, you're going to have to do everything in the game. Like, you're not even going to be able to only raid or only Mythic Plus. I think you're going to have to PvP, Mythic Plus, and raid to have that absolute min-max. But the good news is that I don't think you necessarily have to have that absolute min-max to do decent damage. Like, you do need a good amount of haste. But because crit and verse are so similar to each other that if you have a couple pieces with haste verse and a couple pieces with haste crit, it's not going to detriment you that much. So that's the good thing moving into the expansion. So I'm happy about that. So the stat priority, haste crit default. If you want to focus on some utility, probably you could, or defense, you run haste versatility. You generally want to avoid mastery. It's your worst stat in this expansion for balanced druid. But overall, Moonkin is feeling really powerful at the moment. It's got decent sustain, good burst, like I said, good utility with entangling roots and cyclones. It didn't really lose anything on that front. You've still got team utility with innervate. We lost some bonuses where if you solar beamed somebody on a cast, this is an artifact trait, it would reduce the cooldown to 45 seconds. You don't have that anymore, so there's like a little bit of a skill cap lost there. Your solar beam is just a minute cooldown now. But generally speaking, I really enjoyed Moonkin. It felt very similar, not all the way there. My favorite iteration of Moonkin was Cataclysm Moonkin. I really liked wild mushroom bombs, like cycloning someone and then putting 3 mushrooms under it and then cast a starfire as it ends and then explode the mushrooms and just everything hits all at the same time and it's beautiful. That was one play that I really miss from the game overall, but we've got Hibernate back and it's actually really useful. I've been trying to think of how to use it. The only thing is that it doesn't remove dots, and because your priority is to have dots on everything to generate the most astral power, you then can't use Hibernate. I almost think Hibernate should remove dots the same as Polymorph does. Then it would have you'd be able to use it. So for example, this Shaman, if he goes in Ghost Wolf, you can actually hibernate him. So if you're kiting him and he doesn't see it and doesn't cancel it, you could hibernate him, waste a dispel on the healer, or maybe you can't even dispel it, and then root him after that and then kite away from him, and there was a lot of utility in that sense. Or if a druid is trying to kite across the map in travel form to get to your healer, you can hibernate him before he gets over there. But if it doesn't remove dots, it's really difficult to actually do that because you want to dot people. You would actively have to not dot them, but then all of your dots cleave to other people. So it's not really like you can have a choice. You can, but it means just not pressing any damage in a lot of situations, which then just puts you really far behind, and it definitely feels very sustain oriented. And obviously it's a new expansion, so as far as figuring out like what kind of cooldown pairings go together, because there's not... it's not balanced, so in terms of the sense that Warlords and Draenor and Legion were balanced, where it's like, well, this cooldown was used, so I use this cooldown, and then they cancel out and the game continues. It doesn't really feel like that because damage is high enough that you can sometimes kill through a cooldown, or you force it without using one, and it creates these weird moments where you have to kite and sustain damage matters, which I really enjoy. But I feel like it will be balanced to the point where it gets down to that cooldown trading gameplay, simply because that gameplay logically is the most fair. However, I don't necessarily think that it is the most fun, but it is arguably the most fair. They use this powerful ability, I need to use my powerful ability to survive. But generally speaking, I think with sustained damage mattering more, it creates more intense moments, and you have to kite. Like the Shaman, for example, is having to kite and avoid damage, even though there's really no cooldowns being used, and kind of recover and pull back. And it creates a more interesting dynamic when sustained damage is higher, like it is. So I'm kind of hoping what happens is instead of bringing sustained damage down for specs that are high, they bring sustained damage up for specs that it's low, and it kind of remains that way. Obviously, that's all complete speculation and estimations. My point of view here is to tell you that Moonkin feels really fun, and I've enjoyed it a lot. And it kept a lot of its niche things, and it feels much more similar to previous iterations of Moonkin that I really enjoyed, outside of some cheeky plays that you could do with other spells that existed at the time. I would highly suggest it and recommend it to anybody interested in a spec that does good decent damage, good support, good utility, good teamwork, that kind of hybrid role, kind of the support role on the team. It's a great spec. It's so good that I'm going back to it instead of leveling discipline, like I said in my previous video. So outside of that, I'm trying to think if I've forgotten anything. We went through talents, we went through honor talents, we went through what was missing, went through all the spells. I think we hit everything. If I missed something, let me know in the comments. I will do my best to read them and answer anything that you want to know down below. I'm also going to be doing a 24-hour stream, or attempt to, if I don't die, for Battle for Azeroth launch, which is actually Monday at 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, if you didn't know. It's a global launch. It's going across regions, so it's going to be a bit off than the normal expected Tuesday. So if you're Pacific Standard Time like me, it's 3 p.m. on Monday, and then I'm looking to go the 24 hours on the launch, kind of binge it, and see if I can make it or not. But other than that, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you're encouraged to at least try Moonkin maybe at some point if you're not a main for it already. And I will see you in the next one. Have a good day.